is the Business of Reselling podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Oman. Hey, everyone, and welcome to episode 59 of the Business of Reselling podcast. I think I need to get to 60 by the end of the year, so I'm going to try and do one more episode before the end of December. I have been pretty good at getting back to doing them every couple of weeks, so I'm proud of that. Before I get into today's content, which is about why rich people are your target market, this is a topic I've mentioned before on the podcast, but I heard an interesting podcast from Planet Money the other day talking about this very subject. So I wanted to sort of loop back to that and connect it to reselling a little bit. Anyway, the podcast episodes have been coming out more consistently. I hope you've noticed, and I'm going to continue to do that through 2026. I am trying to grow the YouTube channel, so I hope you'll get over to youtube.com/@Storagewarrior podcast, like, subscribe, make a comment. Help me get a few more subs by year end. Funny thing, I did a video about hey, is there a way, could you give me some feedback and give me one great tip to help me grow the YouTube channel? And I did get some good tips. That video is still available over there on the channel, and I would still love to get feedback on that question. As soon as I posted it, I lost a subscriber. And that just cracked me up. And I was like, all right, fine. That's okay. If this podcast isn't for you, I totally get it. But I did gain a few as well, so that's kind of nice. Viewership is up. The amount of time people are spending on the content is up, so something is working. Anyway, please get over there. We also have a bid rush auction going right now. I know some listeners are also customers and might be interested in what we have to sell there. That one ends December 14th at 7 p.m. Pacific, and I have popped the link in the show notes. Bid rush is going great for us. This is our 5th auction on the platform. Each one is better than the last. This is sort of our holiday auction, and it's a smaller one than we normally do with only 89 lots, but we tried to make the overall value of each lot higher. So we put in some real gold, we have sterling silver, we have coins and paper money. We have a lot more key comic books than we normally do. We usually just put in maybe up to half a dozen. This time we have quite a few more. We also have some video game stuff. So a little bit more variety as well than some of our other auctions. So it's an exciting one. Anyway, link in the show notes if you want to check that out. And if you're interested in trying out BidRush yourself to sell items, you can send me a message, and I have a code for you, which I think might also be down in the show notes, should be. That'll get you 10% fees instead of 12, so a significant saving on the auction fees. Anyway, let's get right into the content and talk about why rich people are your target market. It's not just because they have more money, but it's also because they have an increasingly larger share of the money. So we all know about the wealth gap. That's not a new concept. I liked the way that this recent episode of Planet Money from NPR talked about the wealth gap and how product offerings are changing to meet the demands in the luxury segment. And one of the things that they mentioned was, I think it was Delta Airlines said that for the first time, they were making more revenue from the front of the plane than from the back. So think about that. I mean, it probably means that not just is there more demand for first class and business class seats on planes, but that they're also more expensive. And there seems to be kind of this realization on the part of a lot of these companies that you can really bump up the price for the wealthiest segment of the market, and they will still pay it because they're not necessarily looking for a bargain at all. And as long as the stock market continues to be propped up by whatever it's propped up with, the Magnificent Seven companies, investment in AI, whatever it is, as long as it's up there, it keeps the sentiment of the wealthiest consumers high and keeps them spending even as prices go up and inflation goes up. So the podcast talks about how consumer sentiment is low, but spending is still strong, and that this was an odd thing. So normally if consumer sentiment is low, you also see spending low, but because of this growing wealth gap, you have the top wealthiest 20% of consumers spending over half of all the monthly credit card spending in the United States. I don't know if the same is true for Canada. I would imagine our spending habits to a certain degree mirror that of the United States. Um, but this is a huge divergence and it's growing. So it makes sense that consumer sentiment is low because this makes up the majority of consumers just as a segment. But uh, the wealthiest rich people just continue to spend more and more and more. And that props up consumer spending in the economy overall. And this divergence has really accelerated since COVID, they talk about. And unfortunately, it means consumer debt is up, inflation is up, everything is more expensive, and people on the whole are struggling, but the wealthy are remaining immune to it. So, in fact, not only are the wealthiest fifth of consumers responsible for more than half of all monthly credit card spending, they're also spending 86% more than they were a decade ago, which is crazy. I mean, that outpaces inflation by quite a large margin. Um, so if we look at like wealthy people's assets, which, especially over the last 15 years in the stock market, which has enjoyed the craziest returns ever, combined with rapid increases in housing prices and the value of real estate, people who are able to hold these assets feel very comfortable spending a lot of money because they have an incredible amount of assets to back up that spending. They have a lot of support for it. So there is a possibility that like some big shock to the stock market could just send the economy into a whole spiral. So if something like people are talking about the potential of an AI bubble happening, and if the bubble were to burst, this could send the stock market reeling. This would be a huge problem, and this would shake sort of the spending habits of a lot of wealthy consumers. So it has to be something really big. It has to be a really significant event in the stock market that jostles the rich people out of their spending habits. But as long as this doesn't happen, rich people are still going to stay rich. And the demand for those luxury goods is continuing to be reflected more and more in the availability of luxury and high-end products in the market, as well as a greater variety of luxury products, as well as the price of those products. So we know the wealth gap is widening, but the overconfidence that's on display in the wealthiest segment of the consumer market is really astounding. So I recommend listening to that podcast, and I have linked it down in the show notes. Planet Money overall is a pretty fantastic podcast. Really looks at a lot of interesting things that are happening in the economy. It has a very American bent to it because that's where it's produced, but overall, it's super interesting. Listen every time a new episode comes out. So, what does all that mean for you as a reseller? I've said this before on the podcast. When I was first starting the podcast and we were kind of coming towards like the end of COVID, and this is when people were really starting to get worried that a longer term recession was on the horizon, and it still could be. I said then that people who have money are going to continue to have it. They aren't insulated. So sourcing items that appeal to richer people matters more than you think. And the longer that the stock market continues to be propped up by whatever is propping it up, it's going to continue to matter more and more as this wealth gap continues to widen. So what kind of items am I talking about? So high-end brands, but we're not just talking about like the Louis Vuittons and the Guccis and the Ferragamos. We're talking about like just like solid, good quality brands. Think like maybe Aloe Yoga, that kind of thing. It's like it's pretty expensive stuff. You wouldn't call it ultra luxe. It's accessible for a lot of middle class people to buy one or two nice pieces from Aloe Yoga. It's a good, solid brand that a lot of people like. So those sort of higher end brands, good quality brands, even if they're mid range, things that last, because rich people don't always buy the most expensive thing. They buy a quality thing, or they might buy a nostalgic thing. They might continue to buy a brand like a mid-range brand like Calvin Klein or something like that, or maybe something high, a little higher end like that. I don't know. Let's say Burberry, something that they grew up with, or something they had when they were younger, or a brand that their family introduced them to that's now nostalgic to them. Doesn't necessarily have to be the most expensive brand, but it's going to be a good one, and they continue to buy that for the rest of their life because they like the quality, or they like the feel of the fabric, or whatever it is. So high-end brands, luxury brands, yes, but very high quality brands are going to also be appealing. Rare items, not just any Nike shoes, but a discontinued style of Nike shoes, or one that's really hard to find, or a special edition that came out 15 years ago. Things that are very rare. And that leads into collectibles. You have, of course, your comic books and your Redline Hot Wheels, and your tin toys from Japan from the 1960s. We know that there's a multitude of categories of collectibles that can get very expensive. So these collectibles and rare items are considered not just luxuries in the sense that you need to have some disposable income in order to buy them, but also alternative investments. So these are things that, like, oh, I bought this now and I'm going to hold this in my safe or whatever till I'm 65, and then I can either gift it to my children as an asset for them, or put it in my will, or sell it to go on a fantastic vacation later in life. So people who have a lot of disposable income are going to be looking for these things. And so you'll get that connection between both the collectability of an item and its potential future value with its nostalgia. So especially with something like rare comic books, you're going to get a lot of that. So, yeah, wealthy people can afford to buy their luxury brands at the retail store. But if they're looking for a discontinued style and they still want it, they're going to turn to eBay, or they're going to turn to Poshmark, or another platform where they can find that thing that they had when they were a kid, but they lost it or put a hole in it or whatever, or the special style of a certain kind of handbag that isn't made anymore and they really want it, or a special collaboration between a couple of brands that only came out for 1 year and then it's now impossible to find. So they're gonna buy more of these things, and they're gonna be less price sensitive to them. So give them a mid-price product that lasts, or a rare collectible that you found, and it's a brand that they trust, and they will just buy it and buy it and buy it. They are not interested in your Joe Fresh, your Aldo shoes, your used cell phone. They're interested in your retired design handbag, your vintage Nike shoes, your Redline Hot Wheels, things like that. So while it is true that lower to middle income people obviously make up a larger group of consumers on the whole, so you might think, well, I can put out lower or mid range products, and I've got 80% of consumers still who might be interested in them. We don't necessarily want to abandon that group, of course, but the fact is, if consumer sentiment is low, of that 80% of people, fewer and fewer and fewer of them are going to be looking to buy. Whereas the 20% who have the money now are just going to continue to accumulate more money. They are currently still accumulating more and more money. And so their consumer sentiment is not likely to decline. Of course, we don't want to abandon, like I just said, we don't want to alienate, 80% of consumers in favor of just building a collectibles brand that only sells high-end items. Now, personally, I always want to have some products that are available at an affordable price, even if my margins are a little bit lower on them, or they take a little longer to sell. Look, I know what it's like to struggle financially. I did for a long time in my life, and from an ethical standpoint, I don't wanna alienate a buyer just because they have less money. To me, like, that doesn't feel right. However, I still wanna have a successful and profitable business, and so I know that focusing on that luxury segment, that high-end buyer, that top 20% of the consumer market is where I'm going to continue to succeed the most in my business. We have to remember too that a consumer who is squeezed financially is also going to squeeze you on the price. They may ask many more questions about the product, so they may be like a higher maintenance consumer. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just it has to be the right product for them. They only have a certain amount of budget to spend on this thing, so it needs to be the right thing. So and these lower end items also might take a lot longer to sell, just because there tends to be more of them available on the market. If you're selling Calvin Klein, or if you're selling, I mean, even if you're selling like Polo or Coach, like, these brands are kind of everywhere, and you do find them in thrift shops, and they sit and sit and sit and sit. Anything that says Aldo on it, I don't even bother. But some Eddie Bauer, I will, because that's a brand that is very accessible to most consumers, and rich people like it because it's preppy and it's a good quality product. Um, so you have to choose what balance of items that are sort of for everybody and specialty items make sense for your business. If you have more lower end items, you need to have room to store them for as long as it takes for them to sell. And that could honestly be years. You have to have patience with that. It's just the reality of it. But if you refocus on a wealthier customer base and try to shift your sourcing strategy more for that segment, you're also going to be more wealthy, and you'll get there faster. And it is a sad truth, unfortunately, but I think in the world of reselling, like, these sort of macroeconomic trends are things that we need to pay attention to, and the choices that we make about what we sell in our business, um, they we just have to accept that if we're selling lower end items, that there are certain problems associated with that. And we just have to deal with those if that's what we decide to do. Now, it's not like it's so easy to just go out there and start sourcing luxury items everywhere you go. We all know sourcing is a challenge. I did a whole series very early on in the podcast. If you want to go back to, like, I think around episode 15 here and there, I did 4 or 5 episodes with sourcing strategies and ways you can source. Um, so go back and listen to those if sourcing is a struggle for you. I know it's not necessarily easy to find these higher end products just anywhere out in the wild, especially if most of your sourcing is done at thrift shops. You have a lot of competition. You have a lot of other resellers, always more and more resellers going to these stores and picking up those items and getting there before you. So it can be a struggle. I mean, like, our sourcing is a lot from junk removal companies. So you don't know what you're gonna get. I mean, you'd be astounded at the kinds of things people throw away, but, the client for a junk removal company could be from anywhere on the economic spectrum, and, of course, we have no control over that. So we could get bags and bags of lower end clothing, or we might get 3 or 4, high-end items and luck out. But I'd rather get the 3 or 4 high-end items than the bags and bags of Joe Fresh and Aldo. Actually, that's funny. A few weeks ago, we did get 5 pieces of Lululemon that were all from 2024 and 2025 collections. One of them was brand new with tags. All the other ones were like new. 5 pieces of clothing, all we got that day. Good enough. That's like $500 or more, just right there. So think about that when you're sourcing. What kind of small shifts can you make to maybe make a larger percentage of your store appealing to a wealthier segment of buyers? That's going to help you out in the long run. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, not easy to do. How would you do it? How would you approach this? What's your strategy to try and reach a wealthier consumer? I'm interested. So please leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast at youtube.com/at Storage Warrior Podcast. And don't forget, we're always buying. Hook us up with a great pick in the lower mainland or somewhere in BC, and you will receive a gift. That's all for today. One more time before the end of the year. Talk to you soon. Bye.